Okay, so we are going to be reviewing the external and internal anatomy of worms and squid for your practicum coming up. And I will put this on my YouTube channel by the end of the day so that if you want to review tonight before your test tomorrow, it'll be there for you to see. I think actually last year's practicum also was recorded and up there, so you could see the questions that I asked last year as well. Real quick, while we're getting started, what kingdom of life is this critter in? Animalia. What phylum of life is this critter in? Worm. Worm is not the right answer. It is a worm. No, Cnidaria is stinging-celled animals. This is a segmented roundworm. So what phylum does that mean that it's in? Platyhelminthes are flatworms. This is not a flatworm. Annelida. Good job. Segmented roundworms. Phylum Annelida. So, what did I tell you was the cheat to find out what the dorsal and ventral side of this animal is? What can you see on the ventral side?
The vein.
Yeah, you can see in the ventral vein. So if you're wondering what side is up on a worm, you kind of roll them around a little bit till you see the dark stripe. And this dark stripe here is the ventral vein. So that's the bottom side of the animal. How do you orient yourself for the head end or the tail end, the anterior or the posterior? How do you know where that is? Anterior is thicker than the posterior, that works. What else? What's visibly obvious on this worm besides all the little segments? The clitellum, right? And what's the purpose of the clitellum? It's where the reproductive structures exit the body. So where sperm is given or received is at the clitellum. So that's this section here. And the clitellum, is it closer to the head or the tail? Closer to the head. So that tells you this is the anterior and this is the posterior. Okay, cool. Does this animal have a complete digestive system, or is it a blind sac? Complete digestive system, which means it has a mouth and an anus. The mouth is up here at the anterior terminus, or the front end of the head end of the animal, and the anus would be back here at the posterior end. These little segments, when we cut into it, the segments are all defined by muscle walls. What are those muscles called? The muscle walls that determine the different segments. Septae. Good job. Those are septae. You can't feel it on a video, or you can't feel it at your seat. But as I run my finger down the worm, I feel little bristles. I feel most of them near the tail end and some up here near the head end. What are those bristles called? Setae or setae, yes. Setae and septae, don't get those confused. Setae are bristles, hairs, and the septae are the muscle rings that define the animal. What does the worm use the setae for? How does a hair help you move? Yeah, so he will anchor the hairs in the back end of the animal into the soil, and then he'll push himself. He'll squeeze all the transverse muscles through the animal, squeeze them down to squirt his head forward into the soil, and then he'll anchor those hairs into the soil, and he'll draw up his tail, and he'll anchor those in the soil and then push himself forward again. So that's how they move through the soil. Alrighty, I think that does it for external and orientation on the worm. When we cut into the worm, we did it mid-dorsally, and we started just behind the clitellum, and we went forward, and I'm going to try to do it mid-dorsally as well. So there's the ventral side. So this will be the dorsal side. And I'm just going to cut in here real quick. And then slice just through the skin up towards the head. Okay. And if I did that right, I should now be able to pin it open. Some of you guys, when you pinned your worms, it looked like some horror movie. There were so many pins. It's really not that necessary to have that many pins. But we're just going to pin him a little bit here and open him up as we go. It stinks. It's a dead animal, man. Oh, how pleasant that is. Yeah, you're all freaking about the smell. You're sitting back there. Okay, so after I mocked you for using a bunch of pins, I am going to use a few more. Okay. Let me get a needle probe in here real quick. Okay. Okay. Okay, so can you see that well enough? Not really. Let's see. What can I do here? If I move this up and I move this down.
I see black blobs.
I see black blobs. I see dead worms. There you go. That'll work. Okay. So, we already said the mouth was up here. And there's this this beige organ right inside the mouth, and its job is to suck soil through the mouth. And what's that sucking organ called? No, that is not the ganglia. What's the pharynx? Good job. The pharynx is the structure right inside the mouth that sucks the soil into the worm. There is a tube that I don't want to disturb this tissue too much over here. There's a tube that goes from this beige structure through these black things, which we'll get to in a minute, underneath these white things that we'll get to in a minute, and ends up in this structure. What's the name of the tube that runs down through all of this? Esophagus. Good. It's called the same thing in you, right? Most animals have a tube after the mouth. We'll get to all of this stuff in a minute. The these two structures, there's a less muscular portion of it and a more muscular portion of it. Together, they make up sort of the stomach. But the stomach of the worm is in two chambers. One is less muscular, one is more muscular. What's the less muscular one called? The what? The crop. Good. And the more muscular one is called the what? The gizzard. Good. And then there's a tube that extends after the gizzard and runs the rest of the length of the worm. What's that tube? The intestine. And when I started cutting a little bit too deep, and I popped the intestine right here. And all of this black stuff is soil that the worm was in the process of digesting all the edible portions out of. So this is dirt that is in the process of being digested. There is on top of the intestine a blood vessel, and because it is on the back side of the worm or the top side of the worm, what's the name of this blood vessel here? The dorsal blood vessel. And then underneath the intestine, if I carefully tease it up, there is that darker one that you can see through the skin, and it's right on the skin. I don't know if you can see it in the video, but it's right here. And that's the, what was that?
Ventral.
The ventral blood vessel. Good. Okay. Speaking of circulation, the dorsal and the ventral blood vessels meet up here. And there are 5 arches that join the dorsal and the ventral. And you can see one of them here and one of them here. You can see another one right there. If I were to very carefully tease all this other little tissue off around it, you would see that there are 5. What are those 5 loops called? Aortic arches, and they serve the same purpose as the heart in you. So some people say they're hearts. More properly, they are called aortic arches. Okay. Now, worms are hermaphrodites. What does that word mean?
Don't circulate blood.
No. Both female and male, both sexes in the same animal. So this worm both makes and receives sperm from other worms. They do not impregnate themselves. They do still have to find a partner to have babies with, but when the mating is over, both worms are quote-unquote pregnant. Both worms are able to produce offspring. So there are structures here that make sperm, and there are structures here that hold sperm from another worm. The larger white organs here, do these make or receive sperm from another worm? They make. Good. These are, and so the ones that make are called the what? Seminal vesicles. Good. And these smaller structures up here, they got stuck to the skin as I was cutting him open. There's another one. I think it's this one right here. Those smaller structures are the seminal what? That receptacles. Good. And then you can see a bunch of coiled tissue laying here, and you can't always see that very nicely in the dissections, but this one it showed up. And these are the oviducts. This is where the eggs will be made. So these little small coiled structures, I probably won't point them out on the practicum because you can't always see them, and I'm not sure if everybody did see them, but here it just looks like little piles of spaghetti, and these are the oviducts. So the eggs are made there. Okay. The only other structure in the worm that we want to take the time to try to find is right up around the mouth. There is some nervous tissue, and it's hard to see. I think I might be fiddling with it with the probe right here. It's a little loop of nervous tissue around the mouth. That might be some more of it right there. What is that? What do you call the little loop of nervous tissue around the mouth? Ganglion. And that is its very simple version of a what? No. Brain. This is a very, very, very simple version of his brain. Okay. Cool. I think that does it for the worm anatomy that you'll need to know. We talked about these muscle walls. These are the septa on the inside. I'm pretty sure that does it for the worm. Any questions?